and I am Pastor Peggy from Slave Lake Wesleyan Church in Slave Lake, Alberta.
And I'm Pastor Diane from Norfolk Wesleyan Church in Norfolk, New York. Welcome to Warm-Hearted Wednesday.
Warm-Hearted Wednesday. It's so much fun.
Yes.
Same great show, little different format, new graphics, new intro, new music.
And fabulous guests.
Fabulous guests. We're taking it to a whole new... So who do we have on the show, Pastor Diane, today?
Well, today we are completely honored, and you can tell that we're just both gushing because this lady is a role model for both of us. Dr. Jo Anne Lyon, Reverend Dr. Jo Anne Lyon. She is the General Superintendent Emerita of the Wesleyan Church. So she was the head of our denomination. She also was the founder of World Hope International and I think she is currently the ambassador for said organization, which her son is running that organization now. Just a fabulous lady, a great communicator, and has an amazing heart for people and for the Lord.
And I feel like I'm taking a book from her page because she founded the organization in her bedroom with a desk and a computer, and I'm in my bedroom with a desk and a computer. So I'm like, we are so happy to have Dr. Lyon today. And, just to fill us in a little bit on the history of the Wesleyan Church, because some people think that the Wesleyan Church is like brand new, but it's not. It's been around for a long time. And some issues that the Wesleyan Church are sort of founded on, which I think you'll find extremely interesting and amazing. And just to let you know that there will be two versions of this interview. There will be this one here on Facebook.
And then we'll also have this version on Facebook or on YouTube, but we'll also have the extended complete interview on YouTube, and we will put the link down in the comments.
Yeah. So let's welcome our new guest.
Our new best friend.
Our new best friend. She admires us and we admire her. I love it. It is an honor to have you on here. We were discussing who could we bring on, and we said, well, let's reach for the top.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you. My goodness.
Oh my goodness. Well, I first met you and heard you, of course, at Kingswood. I think it was in 2011, I believe. You were there for like one of our Holiness Weeks kind of thing.
Oh yes, that's right.
Yeah. And then you did you came back, I think, and did like a women in ministry dinner. And I sat at your table.
I remember that.
No way.
Yes, I do. Yeah. When you wrote me that, I said, of course I know who she is. Yeah.
Wow, because I said to Diane, I tried not to monopolize her whole time asking her questions. I really did. I tried to let other people get a word in edgewise.
But you had questions to ask, and the rest of them didn't have any questions, actually. They were younger. They didn't quite know, So they learned from you, actually, in that.
Oh, well.
They learned what questions to ask,
I had made a list, mentally made a list. And I'm like, if I'm sitting with her, I'm going to be asking as many questions to be able to learn.
And I remember that, and I was thinking that, these other younger ones are kind of, deer in the headlights kind of thing. So you kept it alive and kept them on track, I think, of who knows what all they learned just from your questions also.
Wow.
So,
well, thank you for that. That makes me feel better that I didn't.
Right. No. I hear what you're saying though. Yeah.
I was just so fascinated, like how you could just, from your bedroom, right? A computer and a desk set up in your bedroom, how you could seek God and then just start what you've started and just admire your life story and your work and your leadership.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Lyon, for joining us. And I just thought we'd start out with, could you give us a little thumbnail sketch of who you are?
Well, that's really hard because I'm old, and so when you're old, that takes a long time. But I would just say that actually, I was born in, both my mother and father were ordained ministers, and so and they planted 14 churches out in Oklahoma, I mean, all of Oklahoma. And so I was born kind of in that setting of revivalism and that kind of thing. And so I saw them very passionate about the gospel and about people's lives being redeemed and about caring for broken people, caring for the poor, all of this kind of thing. So I was born into that. But you know what? Just because you're born into it doesn't make you that. Like, what's the old saying of just because you put your car in the garage does not make your car a garage. And so I had to come to my own faith and my own way. And a great Jesuit priest says that the is a long tunnel from going from your parents' faith to your own faith. And it was a journey because I knew all these things. But to really come face to face to say, Lord, I am your person, and I need to know you. I mean, I could parrot it all, I could do it all, but it really didn't come until I was married and my husband and I were pastoring in our first church. And that's when I realized I didn't like it. I didn't want to do this anymore. I wanted to go another way. And that's a long story, but God stopped me in my tracks. And I really said, Lord, here I am. I'll do anything. And I began to repent. I'd never really repented before because I'd never done what would be considered bad things. But my spirit was rebellious. I was self-righteous. That's just as wicked. And I began to repent of all of that, and God filled me with His Spirit. And I'm telling you, at that time, it was a spirit of love that I've never. And when we talk about being filled with the Spirit, there are a lot of discussions about what that means. But ultimately, it's about God's love. When His Spirit moves in us, and God lives in us. And so from then on, my life was dramatically changed. And I began to see the world through the eyes. I began to pray for God to help me to see the world through His eyes. And so, done a lot of things, but and worked for a decade in the urban area of Kansas City, Missouri. This would have been in the United States following the civil rights time and really rebuilding the urban part of the city. I worked with federal funds, government funds, and still to this day, there's some great stories that have come out of that. So there's been that part in my life that God has just constantly called me to the issues of justice and His justice. And what does that mean? And it goes along with what it means to be a holy person. It goes along with holiness. We talk about living a holy life. Well, I think that Amos says it very well, let justice roll down like a river and righteousness as a never failing stream. So it's where justice and righteousness come together. And that's the point where transformation takes place. We can do just justice, and it's political, it's probably good works, but it doesn't have any power. And we can just be righteous, and then we isolate ourselves, we become very holy, I think we are anyway. We keep looking at ourselves and we practice all kinds of things, and then he writes words, he says, a loving God wants to redeem a broken world, and He's called us to make things new. And that's what that is about. And so it's constantly that we, through the power of the Holy Spirit, touch things and make them new as God intended them for to be, as heaven on earth, kingdom on earth, His kingdom on earth. So skipping a whole lot, but many people are aware of World Hope International. And in 1985, I was invited to go with an ABC News team to film a documentary on the famine in Ethiopia. And that, still to this day, has been considered the largest famine in modern history. It was absolutely overwhelming, and I could not Today, it's hard to grasp. And at that time, I realized that here we are in a world that has abundance in other places, but not abundance in other places. And no one should starve to death in this world. And so that's what began to catapult me. And I came back and talked about it in the Wesleyan church, because I'm part of the Wesleyan church. And it took us a while to grasp that. But finally, 11 years later, and I talk about this as the fullness of time. You know, when God talks about sending Jesus, it says in the fullness of time. It didn't say on such and such a date, I'm going to do this. It's when all the pieces come together, the fullness of time. And so in my life, it was the fullness of time. It took 11 years. God had to do a lot with me too. He had to do a lot with who we were going to work with. He had to do a lot that I don't even know what he did. But that's when, and I just knew that was the time, so we started in January 1996. Don Bray was the head of the Wesleyan missions at that time, and encouraged this and worked with me on this, but we chose to, and he agreed that we should incorporate separately so that we could work in a lot of other places and do things that the church could not do. And so in fact, we could go into Muslim countries that the church could not go into, or restricted places. So that's what we did. And so, yes, it was a total act of faith. Not many times have I had this radical act of faith. I don't know this much at all. But we had 2 kids that had finished college, 2 more that were in college. And I was on staff at the church where we were pastoring, as well as I was to bring along extra money for the college boys. I was the clinical director for a 4-county mental health system in the St. Louis, Missouri area. And I quit my job. I quit everything and said, this is it. I'm taking this leap of faith. Kierkegaard talks about these leaps of faith. It was one of his total leaps of faith. And I just knew somehow I didn't have any money. The denomination was great, but they didn't have any money to give. And so they would support it emotionally, and I could speak in churches and whatever, but I'll never forget one day my husband called from his office to my office over in the bedroom in the house and said, now I'm just working on our budget. When do you get your last paycheck from the center? And I said, well, I get my last paycheck January the 20th. He said, well, I'll trust God. I trust God. But my 2 sons were at Houghton College then. And he said, Houghton College is sending us the bills. We got to have some money here. On January 21st, I had dinner with a man and his daughter, and he was asking me what was going on. We talked about this prior. And when I finished, he said, God had already revealed himself. And that's what I want to say too many times when we take these leaps of faith, yet God has already revealed himself in ways that you can trust God with it. And there had already been a few incidences that just said, yes, this is what you should do. I could give you those, but don't have time today. But anyway, those affirmations that you're on the right track. So I started telling him about that. And so then he said to me, well, how much is this going to cost you to do this year? And I always say, be prepared. I had no idea. I didn't know what he was going to do. I had no idea. But I had a budget in my purse. I could have sat there and said, well, I don't know. What do you think? How much? Bingo, nothing. People don't want to do that. They want to know that you know specifically what you're getting ready to do. And so I pulled out the budget and I said, here it is. This is what it's going to cost to operate this year. And he and his daughter sat there and looked at it, and tears in their eyes, and they looked at me and said, we'll pick up the whole thing. And so they picked up the entire amount to operate for that first year. Now, he didn't do that every year, just that first year. And God just began to do things in marvelous ways. I mean, that meant I could hire a bookkeeper. I didn't want to handle the money and all of that. Hire a bookkeeper. I had some money now for travel, to go someplace, to speak and tell what God is doing. So anyway, that's how World Hope started, in a bedroom. And then we grew it was in a parsonage, we grew to the 2nd bedroom. And then the 3rd bedroom, my last son came home and said, I'm going to go to DC after I finish at Houghton, so I don't need this bedroom. And I tried to cry, but I acted like it, I think. And as soon as he got out of the driveway, we started painting that room and turned it into another office. And so finally, then we got, finally, the last bedroom in the house was our bedroom. And my husband said, no office in this room. This is our room. So there, we were in a small town right outside of St. Louis. We moved to downtown, it was the old Sears and Roebuck catalog store. It was a really bad place, but at least it gave us more space. And then in the year 2000, we moved to Washington, D.C. and took a church there. And actually, my husband pastored that church. I didn't do much with it. And we moved there, and it just happened to be right at the time that President George Bush came in with the faith-based stuff, and the State Department, we'd started in doing human trafficking in Cambodia, and the State Department opened up a whole thing. I was on the ground floor with all that. So God knew all this timing. I could have never orchestrated that. God knew. And so World Hope is still there, of course, doing well. And then World Hope Canada, we began with that, and World Hope Australia. So, and now we have the World Hope UK as well now. So it's expanding and doing really well. But that's kind of it. 4 kids and 10 grandkids. So.
Wow.
That's an amazing story, and I don't think I've heard a lot of those details.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that's amazing.
So God just continued to show up, and that's it.
Yeah. I know out here in Alberta, there's only 4 Wesleyan churches here in our whole province. Mm-hmm. And most people, because we're new and these churches were actually once standard, now they've become Wesleyan because of the merger. Most people, when I talk to them and say I'm a Wesleyan minister, they're like, I don't know what that is. Can you give us a little history of how the Wesleyan Church maybe started in North America, and what were some of the issues at the time that we just sort of took a role in?
The Wesleyan Church is an old denomination. It started in the late 1800s. It was a group of people with the Methodist Church, and so I think the Methodist Church is probably better known in Canada. Although they become, I think, part of the United Church, I believe. But the Methodist Church is an old church. John Wesley, although John Wesley was an Anglican and never left the Anglican Church, but he started the Methodist Church whether he wanted to or not. And so we were all part of the Methodist Church at that time. But if you remember the late mid 1800s in the States, we were in a bitter battle over slavery, and so there were many churches and many Methodist members that held slaves and held up for slavery, would not fight against it, and there was not a statement with it. And so finally a group of people said, we are going to leave this church because slavery is evil and slavery is sin. And so that's literally the foundation upon which the Wesleyan Church started. And many of our people were abolitionists and went to the South. There was a statement made in the state of North Carolina in the United States that said, there are not enough nooses for us to hang all the Wesleyans we want to hang. Now that's pretty radical. And that shows how many people, and people lost their lives, people were hung as abolitionists to fight against slavery. So it's a pretty radical group. And they didn't do this because it was political, but they did this out of their faith. And as John Wesley, actually the last letter that John Wesley wrote before he died was to Wilberforce. And that letter was to Wilberforce, please do not stop doing what you're doing. And may this, and the line that always touches me deeply, he said, and may this be true in the United States, where the slavery is the greatest evil I have ever seen that the sun has ever shone on. And so this, John Wesley died, and he never did see the slave trade ended in Great Britain, and nor certainly in the United States. But that was his prayer. So that was right in line with what his beliefs were and where he was and how he read the scriptures. So that's the beginning of Wesleyan Church. The stories just abound of what that was. And then a second piece of what the Wesleyan Church was, then also later was the women's rights issues. and Susan B. Anthony and that group. And the only place that would allow them to meet was the basement of a Wesleyan Methodist church in Seneca Falls, New York. Now that today is a public museum, a national museum, and there's a wall there that calls it the Wesleyan Wall, that they still have some bricks from that wall. But that was a part of our beginning also, of women. And then the first woman to be ordained in the United States was ordained by the founder of the Wesleyan Methodist Church, Luther Lee. Her name was Antoinette Brown. She was not a Wesleyan, she was a Congregationalist. But the first woman to be ordained was by him, because again, when they believed in the rights of women. And down here in the United States, women couldn't vote. They had very little right, no property rights, nothing. And they stood up for that. They stood up for slavery. And then abolitionists, and they helped participate in the, is that popping up there? Pop up here. And they participated in abolition themselves and the Underground Railroad. So here in Indiana, which is a funny thing to think about Indiana, I was at this church about 5 years ago, and they said, we need to take you to see some artifacts we don't quite know what to do with them, but here they are. And here was a pulpit where Frederick Douglass had preached from, and Sojourner Truth had preached from that pulpit in a Wesleyan Methodist church here in Indiana. And then I was up on a little north of Marion, Indiana, this little town, Lagodi, and no, I'm sorry, it's another name, that isn't it? It's another name there. And here they brought out a door, and they had bullet holes in this door. And this church had been on the Underground Railroad, and the pastor was called the conductor on the railroad, and they would hold slaves in there as they were trying to escape. And these were bullet holes where slave owners had shot and wanted their slaves out of there. So there's some really radical pieces of people that gave their lives. The church called Freedom's Hill Church in North Carolina, where they built a church for a slave and free people, slaves and white people, there was a lot of things that happened there. So really, it started with saying, and then coupled with this is what it meant to live a holy life. See, it wasn't just political abolitionists. This is what it means to be holy. This is what it means this is what holiness means. This is what it means to live a holy life.
I know that those stories of Phoebe Palmer and the first ordained women and the women's right movement and the Underground Railway and social justice issues around the world, because by the time I became a Christian and was looking for a place to park and to practice my newfound faith at that time, those are the kinds of issues that I wanted to be a part of.
That's right.
And that's kind of life that I wanted to live. And that's what drew me so much to finding my place in the Wesleyan denomination.
That's right, yeah.
So proud to be able to say, these things that we're involved with, that were just not some fly-by-night, thing that started like 10 years ago.
No, it didn't start in the feminist movement in the 60s. And I was on a call the other day with someone from the United Methodist Church, and he didn't know either, his leader, he didn't know we had ordained the first woman, because the United Methodists did not ordain women until 1956.
Right.
And so this is not, so when anyone talks about this, they can't say, oh, well, you're trying to be quote unquote liberal, you're trying to be what, no, this is just who we are. And then another piece of this is that we were a marginalized group, so we weren't trying to be uptown. And so we cared about people coming to Jesus. So there's all kinds of, my mother would tell me times, she was an evangelist and traveled alone before she met my father. And she would tell me about preaching out in the West in schoolhouse revivals, where these guys would all come in with guns, holsters and guns and, everything, and come to the altar, so there was no fear. It was just, this is who we are, and God will protect us, and God will guide us in this. So I think that's part of it. is, in a sense, when you are marginalized, you don't have to live up to someone else's. You're not trying to be big shot or something. You don't have to live up to someone else's expectations. You're just following what Jesus taught and with the gospel. Now, I understand. I've never seen this proven, but I understand that the first woman ordained in Canada, at least in the Atlantic area, was ordained by a pastor of the Reformed Baptist Church.
I believe I read that not too long ago.
Yeah. And so that is, that says again, because the Reformed Baptists are now at Wesleyans, and that says that, again, here we were pretty radical out there in front, doing what we felt God had called us to do and to be.
I didn't know that about the Reformed Baptist. I mean, I was in Atlantic Canada, but Pastor Diane, that's where she's from. She grew up in the Reformed Baptist, now Wesleyan.
Yeah.
So she knows more about that history than I certainly do. But Dr. Lyons, I would like, I've heard you speak before Silver Lake, at Kingswood, at different places like that. And you've told social justice stories from your ministry around the world. But is there one story that sticks out to you as being, a highlight for social justice? And, could you take us through that story a little bit?
Well, I remember when I first hadn't started World Hope very long, and the Civil War was going on in Sierra Leone. And it was a brutal civil war, and the rebels were, and this had nothing to do with religion. It was a power war, and it had nothing to do with. It was power. It didn't have anything to do necessarily with tribal war or anything, as Rwanda was in a sense. This is just a power war, and the way the rebels marked their territory was to cut off people's arms and legs and so forth. Well, the news was getting here all the time. I mean, the news was not getting here. We were getting the news from our church, but it was never on the news here in the States and in Canada. Might have been a little more in Canada, but it wasn't getting here. And I was naive too, and I thought, well, if I could just go and take a journalist with me, we could get a story and bring it back, and I'm sure CNN and ABC, they would love to get it. I was so naive. But anyway, so I found this guy, and he said he could do it, and he'd go with me, and he wouldn't charge anything, so that was great. So we made our way across, and I began to look at his stuff as we were going. I thought, ooh, this isn't going to be the best. This isn't going to cut the mustard that we need. Anyway, so we landed in the capital city of Freetown, and I was a wreck. I prayed, Lord, you got to give me the gift of journalism, the gift of photography right here. And I had a camera that was about 2 stages above a little brownie. And I said, Lord, we've got to do this. Well, anyway, as we were getting our bags off the carousel, this man came up to me, gave me his name, and he said, hello, I am. And he said, I'm a foreign correspondent for the Washington Post. I'm in here to get a story. Is there some way you could help me? And I was stunned. Then of course, absolutely, I was ready to go to sleep at his place that night. I needed to. And I said, where are you staying? And he gave me a guest house because hotels weren't open. There was nothing. And so I got his guest house, got his number, got all of that. And of course, I was with the church. There were no missionaries there. It was all, and there are no missionaries there now either. It was all very well run. But the national superintendent had already been captured by the rebels, was behind rebel lines. People had been killed. It was awful. And they knew where to go. So that next day we traveled together. And that Washington Post reporter and I, and the guy that was with me, we traveled together for 3 days. And that's where we began to get in touch with we went to a place where they, about 1,200 amputees in this campsite. And it was one of the most heart-wrenching things you can imagine. And he was deeply moved by that. And as we went back to the vehicle, he said, what are you going to do about this, Jo Anne? He said, this is the worst evil I have ever seen. He just told me to come back from Afghanistan where he's trailing around the Taliban. And he said, this is the most evil I have ever seen. What are you going to do about it? And I said, only God can do something. Really, because I knew we didn't have any resources. How do you take on something so huge? All of this. And I couldn't help but think of Paul's words, we overcome evil with good. And it doesn't mean like nice little good deeds of, helping little old ladies across the street, but it's God. We overcome evil with God, power of God. So he went back to the States. That story was on the front page of the Washington Post. And the picture of some of the women, a mother and a child in that camp, because both of their arms had been cut off, and hear them tell their stories. It was powerful. I mean, stuff began to move in remarkable ways. President Clinton at that time appointed a special envoy, let me know who it was, to Sierra Leone, and all kinds of things began to happen. And the church rose up, and God began to open doors in remarkable ways. But that Post reporter didn't just leave me there. He said, I'm getting letters all the time, emails all the time. You got to do something. I said, we don't have any money. Well, I'll find you some money, he said. And so, lo and behold, he found a foundation in the UK that would help us get started with limbs and get started with all of this. And then, like Paul McCartney's wife, who was that wife at that time, had a amputated leg and contacted me and wanted to know how they could help. And they paid for an inventor to come to help us to make. We were bringing prosthetics over from the States, but we needed something that could be made there and train the people. And so we did that and so forth. So anyway, that is where I say, when also many times we think, well, I can't do anything big because I don't have anything. What you have in your hand, what is in your hand? And all I had in my hand was that journalist, well, whatever he was, who said, I can help you. And that's all we had. And you take what's in your hand and God multiplies it. I mean, if I'd have waited until, I didn't ever run into that guy, because he said to me from the Washington Post, he said, I've been trying to get in here all this time and they keep sending me to the Middle East. This is the first day I've been able to get in here. So that's where you risk. There's a risk when you trust God. I don't mean you're foolish, but there's a risk. And finally, I just felt compelled. We've got to get there to get the story. Even if I just tell the story to the church, we got to. These are our brothers and sisters, and we've got.
That goes back to what you said earlier about the fullness of time.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so, things continue. It's continue there, obviously, in a lot of ways. So I think. And one of the things about justice, and we're working in issues of injustice, for example, here in this state, well, let me flip up to Canada. So at the end of there was a 30-year war in Sri Lanka with the Tamils and the Sri Lankans. And it ended. And so I was invited to go with the World Evangelical Alliance on a peacemaking mission. And I was the only American. There were two ministers of parliament from Canada, some from South Africa, and from the UK. And I'll never forget that time. I learned so much from, they were wonderful MPs from Canada, and Oxford lawyers, lovers of Jesus, great. And so when we went there, we were a lot of places, but I'll never forget meeting with a constitutional lawyer from Sri Lanka who was Hindu. And we were talking about truth and reconciliation commissions that were very effective in South Africa in bringing peace. And we talked about him, and the lawyer the MP from Canada spoke about it in really legal ways and so forth. And they both understood each other since they're both Oxford grads. And then he finally said, the constitutional lawyer from Sri Lanka said, truth and reconciliation can only work in a country that has primarily Christian principles. It cannot work in our country. And I thought that was very fascinating, because it's that whole basis of morals and ethics that come from the teachings of Jesus. Doesn't mean everybody follows a Christian or whatever, but it means it's the ethical teachings of Jesus that really become a foundation on which that works. I was unable, I've never been able to get away from that. Then when we work with actually a lot of other religions, we still try to find those basic moral and ethical foundations from which we can work.
I know, I've heard the story, you shared that story of Sierra Leone at Kingswood. And I know for me, it inspired me to always say to people, you know what? You never know what God is going to put in your hand. Just look for where God is working and use your gifts and talents to do his work. Not to do my work, not to do the work of this church or this person or whatever, but what has God given to you? Because whatever God has given to you is a talent and a gift that you can use for his purposes.
That's exactly right. And the other thing I might say about justice work is we give up too soon. Because justice, justice issues are deep, and people have to give up. People who have power have to give it up when true justice takes place. And so that's what makes justice work very difficult. But I think about we're embroiled in the United States right now in issues of immigration and how to have a really fair, comprehensive immigration reform. And we started working on that in 2006. I thought then, yeah, it's going to be a piece of work just to kind of get, and President Bush was the president then. We had, didn't work all next 4 years, still hasn't worked. But we haven't given up. And I keep saying to the people with whom I work on this, but remember how long it took Wilberforce, 20 years. But righteousness finally came. And I think in justice work, we quit too soon. Oh, it's impossible. And I think of Native Americans and Canadian natives, the injustices there. But it can't be ignored and say, well, it can never change. No, it can. It can change. But let's go way back to John Wesley. I mean, what are some of the things, the justice things that John Wesley did? One of the first things he saw were poor children who were made to work in the mines, the coal mines, and said, this is an abomination. These children cannot go to school. They have no future. They die with this. This is not right. And so what did he do? He worked to change the laws. It isn't just, we'll take care of these people, and many times you have to in the process, but you change the laws. And I love the one on the corn laws that he did. The price of grain was so high because they were making so much ale, and poor people could not buy bread. So he could have said to all the rich churches, you go take bread to all the poor people. But he said, no. We need to change the law so that poor people can buy their own bread. It's about dignity. He did that. I mean, there's many things he did. But the thing that I love the most about, and part of that was the power of God, and the people's lives were transformed. So it all went together. And at the end of, and many historians, secular historians, say that England was saved from the bloody revolution of France because of the John Wesley revivals. And people's lives were transformed, but justice took place. It wasn't just everybody felt better and now we're going to go to heaven. No, they said we've got to make our place. We have to make our country just. In fact, he used to say, spreading scriptural holiness to reform a nation.
Wow.
And so those are the pieces. And he was the first one to start microfinance, gave people loans to start businesses. So it wasn't a dependency kind of a thing. Although if you were ill and weak, you fed people. Started healthcare, the whole business. It just goes on and on. So I think that's such a model of what the body of Christ is and what God has called us to do. All of that together.
And sometimes I think, like working in the social justice field in my secular job as well as ministry here, sometimes what gets discouraging is the fact that you try and it seems like no progress was done, or you've taken 3 steps back.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
that gets discouraging, but you just keep on moving forward. There will be people that will come alongside that will help, and then there will be people that'll come alongside and things won't go the way you can't give up. You can't
That's
give
right.
up.
You
right?
absolutely cannot. And but it will happen. I mean, I just keep thinking I mean, we have lots of issues, racial issues here in the States, and working on that, and many pieces with it. But you keep speaking, you keep moving.
Yeah.
And
So
God is healing.
Dr. Lyons, we're in the midst of this global pandemic now, and in every country, the whole world is being affected by it. Is there anything that you would like to speak into that area as we go forward as a church?
Well, I think this becomes the greatest time for the church. It's difficult. Everyone has an opinion. There are all kinds of conspiracy theories out there. I don't know if you have them up there, but we have them down here. And if we aren't careful, we will constantly get sidetracked with the conspiracy theories. And the conspiracy theories will keep us isolated, will make us move back inside. They will make us lose faith, and we start believing those, and we don't see God present and God at work. And so it's difficult to lead in this time, because everyone has an opinion, about how you ought to lead. Should you have church? Shouldn't you have church? And I don't know what your laws are either, but the real piece is that God still has called us together. The church is not closed. The church is still open. The church is being the church as it's never probably been in recent history. I mean, I think of the early church in Rome that went through the pandemic, and people now think it was smallpox. Who were the Christians? And they were the real minorities. Nobody cared anything about them. And they kept taking care of people. They kept it going. They didn't leave. Everybody left, but they didn't. They stayed right there. And so I just think it's the great opportunity that we have during this time to stay focused on who God is, look at history, how He's led us all this time, not just this is the only thing that's happened. If we go back, we've had many of these times along the way. And the church has still gone through, I think, of the 14th century Black Plague. Churches turned their churches into hospitals. And if you read anything of Catherine of Siena, she was a major leader during this time. And so it's just keeping your focus on doing what God's called. And I feel like we have a revival of compassion that's happened during this time also. And we can't lose that people are caring for each other in ways that they didn't care for each other before, because they just expected the church to do it. So we're caring for each other, learning who each other is, and trying to stay away from all those conspiracy theories and move forward at where God is leading us.
Did we have any more questions, Peggy?
Is there anything else you'd like to share with us?
Well, I'd just like to say that as we look around the world right now, 3 billion people are locked down.
Yeah.
And that in itself, I don't even know how that can be when multi-generations of people live in little places. But anyway, that's the way it is. And so there are. I was on a call with the Secretary General of the World Evangelical Alliance, who lives in the Philippines, and he said that the mega churches in the Philippines have turned their churches into hospitals. And then I was with the director of the African Evangelical Alliance. And so the question was asked, what do you need? He said, what do we need? We need water. He said, we cannot wash our hands in the sand. We cannot wash our hands in dirty water. So we need clean water. Well, through World Hope, we do water, of course. And yet in West Africa, they're locked down. However, in Liberia, they have a curfew till 3. And Sierra Leone is kind of locked and unlocked. And we have rigs that drill wells. But one of the things when we talked with them, one of the things that they said, you know what? If we could rehab wells, we can do that a lot faster. There are broken wells all around. We don't know who did them, but we can rehab. So we've done that. And right now we've just finished up and have reached over 30,000 people with rehab wells, and churches here to help pay for it. But rehab wells and set up hand washing stations in all those places. So then we found in Sierra Leone, they're still drilling wells there, but there was a place that was a spring, and people would go to the spring all the time, but they would take the mud down with them to the spring as they would go walk down into it. So we just built what's called a spring box and put faucets on the outside. So now 2,000 people will have access to that spring, and it's pure water now, and it won't be contaminated. So thinking about all kinds of creative things in that way. But then there's been this projection that we will have famine of biblical proportions that came from the World Food Program. But I'm saying now, well, we're trying to get ahead of this with water. We're trying to get ahead of it. Clean water, of course, as we all know, that helps with health, not washing your hands, but the regular health. And then now these people will have water to water their garden, so they'll have some food. So we can get ahead of this in this way. And various other things around the world in that. But I think and we do a lot. World Hope works in anti-human trafficking. And I just heard yesterday 87 children were repatriated from Kuwait back to Sierra Leone who'd been trafficked, and 78 of them tested positive for COVID. Yeah, so those are some, and we have the only shelter in the country there, World Hope does. So those are some tough stuff. Definitely. Also. So I think that's prayer, and I think God's guiding, and I think God's opening doors that we don't know that can be opened, and I think when you both are pastoring, and if your people can see God at work in greater things too, I think it encourages them. It really does. I don't know, it encourages me and encourages you to know that God's at work in a greater way out there.
Well, we have a small church here in Slave Lake. There's, on a regular Sunday morning, there's 6 members.
Yeah.
Registered members, and we probably have like 10, 15 adults in our church service. So a lot of times we feel alone. We feel right. Alone, and that we're not part of something bigger. But when something like this comes along, and you can speak into these issues and realize that we are not alone in this.
That's right.
We're all over the world, and not just us, but other faith communities, other Christians, and this is a time where we need to pull together.
That's right.
Collectively have unity and focus on the one thing that's important, and that's our belief and our faith in the Lord Jesus Christ.
That's right, and it's not going to be easy. I had a call from a pastor this morning talking about some of these things, and it seemed that as if all these voices coming into everybody, they get confused. So they need to just keep hearing from you that you're the ones they trust, and keep hearing from you to keep forward, keep moving forward. God's done this before in the past, and He's going to do it again. And this could be, I've always said we're going to have another awakening of revival, but I hope I don't miss it, because it won't look like it's looked like in the past. I don't know, again, I'm not a prophet, I don't know if it is, but it sure looks like it to me, because the people that are saying, well, I wasn't a believer, but I think maybe religion may be something here. It seems to be the only thing that's solid. No.
Yeah. And we have a new society, a new generation
Right.
that are conscious about world issues and
right.
things like that. So it could look a lot different than it has looked. It may look the same. Who knows?
Yeah, right.
God knows, but
God knows. And so we just keep trusting Him to move forward with it.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Yeah. It revival looked different in Paul's time and Peter's time than it does now. Back then they wrote letters, now we're using Facebook.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
God's prepared us for this time, actually, I think, with the communication.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really believe it.
Well, I think we've got a lot of stuff to think about.
Good,
Yeah.
good.
Thank you so much for sharing.
I am Pastor Peggy from Slave Lake, Alberta.
I'm Jo Anne Lyon, General Superintendent Emerita of the Wesleyan Church and founder of World Hope International.
And I'm Pastor Diane from Norfolk, New York. Tune in tomorrow for Tadpole Thursday. It's going to be so much fun. Until then, be safe.
Be healthy.
And be the church.
Amen. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.